Good evening and welcome to Flat Earth United Kingdom. Joining me this evening is Tim Osman of Infinite Plane Society. How are you doing, Tim?
Very good, Nathan. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. Let's get straight down to your name. So, Tim Osman might be familiar to some people who've been around Flat Earth for a while. Where did you come up with the name?
Yeah, I kind of stole it from a rather pernicious troll who happens to be my biggest fan now. He stalks me openly, so that's fine. It was a mix of things, though. I think we both stole it from the CIA code name for the actor who played the terrorist on 9/11, that really famous movie you probably saw, Bin Laden. His code
Sure.
name was Tim Osman, OSS man, which was OSS was what the CIA was prior to being the CIA, and that's where I took it from. And it's just for me, it's a convenience thing. I like to keep my customer groups separate, not customer groups, but like audiences. Like I sell artwork under one name, and I don't necessarily want my collectors who've been buying art from me since 2007 or so to come to Flat Earth right away through me. So I kind of like, well, let me just pick a different name for my Flat Earth activity. So I went with Tim Osman for a couple of reasons. Mainly, also, I heard this troll Tim Osman running around, and I thought, I'm just gonna, you know, borrow it.
I thought it was a stroke of genius, I've got to be honest, because he's essentially built up a name. And it does, in terms of recognition, who cares how the name's been built up? It's just brand recognition. So you might as well swipe it. But you've got a slightly different spelling. So you spell it with a Z. Was there, I know the answer to this already, but was there a reason behind that?
Oh yeah, I spelled it Tim Osman. Yeah, definitely a different reason. A couple of reasons. We have I did it really as my own way of kind of trolling as well, because people hear Oz and they think either Wizard of Oz or Lieber Oz, tying it into Aleister Crowley. I, I don't know. I think it's fun. I think it's funny to play with names and words, pseudonames. It's all in good fun. But yeah, getting underneath the skin of another troll is always great. I've done it before. You just find a big troll, and if you can hijack it and you can just run with it, yeah, you can take over their brand. It's like wearing their skin. So I'm a troll slayer.
Awesome. So let's get down to flat Earth business. How did you find out Earth is flat?
Let's see. It was, I think, like a lot of people, it was after a long process of having researched alternative news, quote, conspiracy theories for a long time. And it's a matter of, I think, progressing down the rabbit hole. So it went from, recognizing these, what I thought were just false flags and that people were actually being killed, to recognizing psychological warfare operations for what they actually are, and then the NDAA, as in propaganda. And as I started to look at it from this perspective, I started going increasingly deeper down the rabbit hole. And it was at just one critical point in my life, a number of synchronicities led me to a point where I spent a couple of months in a motel. I was between homes, and I just happened to be at the edge of town, this Crossroads motel place next to a big statue that was a replica of the statue at the Rockefeller Plasma of Atlas holding the globe. And out of curiosity, I was researching the origin of that thing because I was doing a painting of it. And I find out, wait a minute, did they know the world was a ball back then? Why is he holding a ball on his back? And it was made into the fashion of a globe. And then I learned that no, he was holding the celestial sphere. And it wasn't until the 19th century that they started putting a globe on his back. And when I was researching this through YouTube, like a lot of people do, you go through documentaries, etc., it started pulling flat Earth content into my feed. And as I started reading through, my first, as for most people, my first time seeing a flat Earth video, I laughed. I mean, I laughed. It was Mr. Thrive and Survive. I saw some model with the sun going around, and I was like, how can people believe this? And I thought it was a hilarious joke. But once that initial reaction passed, I thought, well, I'm going to debunk it. I'm going to troll these people. And I started trolling flat earthers. But like I said, I had a couple of months off work, and I was just in a motel studying and researching. And so, like a lot of people, I realized, wait, there's no curve. And when I started really kind of conceptualizing the horizon and how the horizon rises to your eye level, and thinking about all the times I've been on plane flights, and I looked out across the expanse of clouds thinking, wait, that looks like an endless flat plane to me. And then it just sort of dawned on me. I go on these long walks at night looking at the moon and the stars. Everything seems so close. And I just started to get real visceral sense of, wait, this is a very stationary place. And when it hit me that this thing was flat, my first impression was, holy crap, we are in a vast mind-controlled concentration camp of some kind of habitat for humans, and the elite are somehow keeping us all brainwashed. That was my first, like, I didn't think of it as a benevolent thing. I was like, oh, this is horrible.
Oh, right. So immediately it's sort of not despairing, but you realize the gravity of the situation. And I use that word sparingly.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I saw it as something to be overcome. Like, to me, it kind of reminded me of the old Gnostic interpretation that maybe, souls are trapped in flesh. This Gnostic conception that the world itself is a type of a prison, and you have to mentally and spiritually work your way out of it. And that was something I've always thought about before when I've always looked at the analogy of the Matrix and all that. But I didn't realize that it's not just like an abstraction. This is a physical, concrete reality. We are indeed in a prison.
Sure. I mean, whenever asked who the powers are, they are the people in charge. It's as simple as that. But in terms of the people that are hidden, do you feel that the deception that's been perpetrated is, I don't know, established in such a way that the people who are in charge may not or need not know about how it came to pass in the way that you're telling people it came to pass?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something on a need to know basis. And I've always, you research and stuff, you begin to understand about compartmentalized knowledge, about hierarchical controls where they compartmentalize knowledge, monopolize it at the top. And then I started reflecting upon, here's the strange part. I was researching that statue about Atlas and all that. And that statue that I saw, there was a replica of the one at Rockefeller Plaza. I started looking into the architecture at Rockefeller Plaza, and it had reference to this thing. There's this mural at the top of this character. They call him Urizen, Urizen, which is William Blake's name for the demiurge. And he's holding a compass. And I started thinking, wait, he's on the roof holding a compass. Down on the ground, you have this Atlas figure with the ball. And then I started remembering a lot of the symbolism from Freemasonry, which was something that I had devoted a couple of years to. And it looked to me like, wait, this looks to me like Urizen, or the demiurge, draws a compass, with a compass, draws a circle. In other words, it looked to me like we are all in the position of Atlas, having had a boundary placed around us, disguised as a globe, and it pins us down in place at the base of the big Rockefeller Tower, which I saw as like the obelisk. In other words, that's when it dawned on me that we're looking at an elite control system. The globe is nothing more than an authoritarian control system. It's not a map. It's just a construct used to enslave human minds.
With this sphere, you're describing something that in British iconography we have the crown jewels, which is a sphere with a cross sort of on the top
Yes.
of it.
Yes.
And you often on your videos describe the globe as the latest incarnation of the cross. So that's an interesting, an artifact like that, where you have literally the juxtaposition, is that the right word, of the globe and the cross together. It's quite interesting. But what I want to lead the audience into hearing is how there's been a 2,000-year plus deception that has evolved, or I would like to say it's been recycled over and over again by psychopaths. But without leading you too much, can you detail how what was the cross maybe 500 years ago is now the globe?
Yes, and you nailed it. Because what it dawned on me, and it really hit me when I saw this image. I was familiar with it because I've always studied iconography, and I recognized that, the Pope sits on the throne of Jupiter. They renamed it, but that's what it is. And he's always been depicted as holding the imperial orb of the Holy Roman Empire, which is the ball with the cross on top. And, I've always seen the symbol. I just never really thought too much about it. But then it hit me that what we essentially have been living under is a system of control that has been rebooted for a scientific age, and they have just simply replaced the cross as the symbol of this thing to a globe, and it's the same thing. See, the cross was a tool of, I know people think of it as a holy thing, but I'm talking about the origin of Christianity, Constantine, and the use of Christianity as the basis for feudalism. It was a tool of slavery, and the cross is essentially, you're nailed to the cross by the empire. And then I saw, wait, the globe is the same thing. It's the same purpose. It's the same idol, just kind of refashioned for the newer age, and they replaced Roman polytheism with the sun god in the center with heliocentrism. Of course, Helios being the name of a sun god. And the more I dug into it, the more I saw, wait, we are looking indeed at a control system that goes back 2,000 years plus. And the more I studied deeper into the flat earth, I realized that most of the narratives that you hear coming from researchers begins with the Copernican revolution. But if this cross-globe continuity thing is right, then no, it actually starts way further back.
Okay, so if it's a 2,000-year-old deception, you've essentially answered a question that for me was the most important question of flat earth, which is why? And you've said it's a control system. I mean, can you give that a bit more? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yes. Okay. If you study what, say globalism is a political movement of uniting the world under a one world government. And that one world government, if you study globalism, is in fact neo-feudalism for all. And so if you look at the Christianity, they created this feudalistic system, and then they had the Reformation. They kind of lost their power, and it looks like the church kind of lost its ability to hold this one world order down. And then I realized, no, the Jesuits just surreptitiously remade their religion to keep everyone in the fold. And now their next goal, since they already have us under the one world religion, heliocentrism, all they need now is to re-solidify their power as the one world government. And that's globalism. And globalism falls apart without belief in the globe, just as neo-feudalism fell apart once the church's claim to authority on religion fell apart, with the Reformation.
Explain neo-feudalism.
Oh, it's just feudalism recast in the 21st century. So before, feudalism was you're born a slave, you have these kings who are divinely appointed over you. Today's feudalism is, hey, you guys are polluting the world, you're going to kill Mother Earth, we need to reduce our carbon footprints. And if you notice, globalism is actually being advanced under the banner of environmentalism. That is the cornerstone of global governance. It's all about saving the planet because they have decreed freedom is unsustainable. And if you look at Agenda 21, Code Next, and all the environmentalist agenda as a whole, it's all about reducing us back to the level of serfs. It's world communism, and communism is serfdom. It's just slavery under a different name.
So in order to have a one world government, you've said that we would first need a one world religion, which would be heliocentrism. Have I said that correctly? Probably not.
Sure, that's fine.
Yeah, so we've got this one world religion that most people have no vague idea that they're living in a belief system because they're presented with visual confirmation from NASA. And this is something that in the next few days you'll be bringing up at one of your council meetings. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yes. Yeah, because when I started this channel, it's when it really hit me that heliocentrism is the new world order religion, because all the conspiracy theories that I had studied over the years have all said, hey, watch out, once they have a one world religion, one world government comes next. It's like this 1-2 combination that knocks out the whole human race. And then I realized, wait, they already hit us with one. We already have one foot in the grave collectively. And once they cinch down this power as a one world state, we're all screwed. And this was something that I realized in 2015. I was like, okay, that's where we're moving towards. And yeah, it all does hinge upon the testimony of the modern priesthood, the priests of scientism. NASA being, of course, astronauts are nothing more than, like when I look at the spacesuit, to me, that's clerical garb. That's religious garments. It's not scientific. It's all just part of their religious paradigm. And so, yeah, I decided that we need to make this thing move. We need to move this forward. We're not going to have this mass awakening. We're not going to break away from globalism or this big spell, this big deception of this one world order religion that we've all been indoctrinated into. Because this means that one, none of us had secular educations, and two, we do not have a separation of church and state. We do, in fact, live under theocratic systems run by technocrats, but it's all covert. And the only way we're going to overcome this is if we hold our leaders accountable. But the only thing people respond to, I think, mostly is money. So my angle is, if I can go to my city council and say, hey, we have $19.5 billion going to essentially Hollywood, a brainwashing organization that has been discredited, maybe this money, I mean, think about it. 19.5 billion could have bought healthcare for everyone for 2, 3 generations. It's just a huge waste of money. We're hemorrhaging money. And that's why I call this class of rulers an elite parasitic class. They're stealing our money. And if they tax you 100%, you're a slave. And that's what their goal is, total slavery. So I am indeed taking this message to city council at this next meeting. It's just going to shock everyone. I'm not going to say flat earth. I'm going to bring it up as an issue of malfeasance that needs to be talked about. And I think bubbles in space is a Trojan horse meme that has the potential to carry this message far and wide. It can slip through the filter. Because out of all the proofs, bubbles in space is one of the ones that is just most blatant. It's like, wait, there's something false going on here. And even a lot of non-flat earthers have realized that NASA's been faking live streams on Facebook, which is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a huge amount of deception afoot, and we've touched on why, but maybe if we take a step back and go to the how, you've said about Helios being at the center, heliocentric, right?
Yes.
And the starting point, from what I can gather from watching your videos for a couple of months now, is that you start off with some worship to begin with, and they have their gods as the planets. Can you take us through the progression and how the monotheistic, again, I hope I'm getting these words right, views had to be incorporated? Can you sort of give us a progression through with Christianity or the Abrahamic faiths in the middle? Does that make sense as a question?
Yes,
I hope so.
Absolutely. Yeah, because what I'm saying is that these religious, like, I make a big distinction between spirituality and religion. But as far as I'm concerned, it looks to me that these religions all follow a blueprint, it's a template for control. And the template works like this. It's all based on astrotheological deities. It's polytheism. So you have this elite who say, I am the representative of the sun god. And the embodiment of the sun god, whether it's Horus or Apollo, has always been, the sun god is the son of Jupiter. So Apollo is the son of Jupiter, if you look at the myths. Or Zeus, the biggest planet, well, before Neptune was discovered, was Jupiter. So that's the king of the heavens. That's the father above. That's the king of kings and lord of lords. But his earthly representative, his son, his incarnate representative, is Apollo. And this is the Roman system. And so when you look at the creation of Christianity, it had to do with creating a new world order back then. And back then, the Jews were not idolaters and they were not polytheists. And so in order to incorporate them into the empire, Christianity was created. And what they did was they basically gave Roman polytheism a Judaized paint job. They changed
what's polytheism?
Yeah. So it's a polytheistic system masquerading
sorry, just to give the audience clarity, explain exactly what being polytheistic is.
Okay. Polytheistic means essentially just many different gods. So every planet represents a god. In classical astrology, you had Venus, the goddess, you had the sun goddess, and then the moon, and then you have all the different planets have their different characteristics. Like Mars is the war god, known to the Greeks as Ares. Mercury is the messenger god, god of medicine, magic, known as Thoth to the Egyptians. Hermes to the Greeks, and of course, Romans, Mercury. So they have this polytheistic system, but when they turned it into Christianity, they made it look like monotheism. So if you look at the Catholic Church, they renamed Jupiter St. Peter. All the different Roman gods just had new names. They were just rebranded the whole thing to make it palatable to the masses. But meanwhile, the entire time, the Pope has retained his position as Sun God Incarnate. His title is Vicarius Dei or Vicarius Filii Dei. And that phrase translates numerically to 666, which is the number of the sun god. So, and this is important. The term Antichrist used to be substitute Christ. It wasn't about some big bad guy, some devil. It just meant you're sitting in the office of Christ. Like you're sitting instead of Christ. That was what Christianity did. It established a succession of popes who are basically like kings. That's the closest thing to God on earth, and he's the one who delegates authority to all the regional kings that rule over the slaves. So he's basically like the big boss of this matrix system, right? And so I'm like, wait, the Pope has his number 666 encoded into him because it's the same with Horus and all the other sun gods. And then I'm like, wait, this explains why when they renamed it as heliocentrism, they encoded that number into it. So the Earth is tilted 23.4 degrees, leaving 66.6 in the right angle, which means if you're a heliocentrist, you're bowing to the sun god in the middle, Helios, Apollo, the Pope. That's how it works.
Well, there's going to be a huge number of people who, and I say this with a smile, who will go, no, no, no. 666 is the sign of the devil and the beast and all of this sort of stuff. So I don't want to steal your thunder, but we have a 400-year-old deception in that regard. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, and this is something that I have to do with my channel. I'm trying to get people to understand this because a lot of people have a certain interpretation of Christianity based on a big fat lie, which is 400 years ago, part of the Reformation, the church said, or the church basically commissioned a Jesuit, the Pope commissioned a Jesuit to kind of rewrite their myth. So instead of Antichrist just being sitting in Christ's position, they use the Latin word Antichrist. So Antichristos is Greek, substitute Christ. Antichrist, as in this opposition figure, was invented. It's called futurism. So if you look up futurism, you'll see that it was invented 400 years ago, and it was just a big fear-based mind control tactic to try to get all the stray sheep back into the fold of the church. And so it's a fear-based mind control apocalyptic scenario that was invented by the same people that invented the ball. And so for all these Christians who are waiting for a second coming, it's like, hey, I'm sorry, but the Jesuits got you there too. That's why I've been so opposed to religion, is like the globe's a religion, and the religious systems are just full of these deceivers who use myths and narratives to control people's minds.
Okay, well, again, there's going to be another group of people that will hear that and say, well, no, it's the Jews that are to blame, or it's specifically the Freemasons that are to blame. So how would you address the people that go after the scapegoats or the individual groups?
Right. And that's actually a valid conclusion if you assume that this deception starts with the globe. And that's why I think it's important to recognize that this is an ancient system, because yeah, if you traced it just back 500 years, you could make the case this is a Jewish thing, given that if you say that those Jesuits were Jews, which I don't know if that's true, but it seems to be the case that many of them were. So what you'll hear many people who research this say, they'll say, well, the Jews basically infiltrated the Vatican and then made this big deception. And I'm like, that is a red herring. That is a diversion, because the Jews didn't infiltrate the Vatican. The Vatican has always been an authoritarian control system, and they just rebranded it because they lost power with that Reformation. And their power has always been the power to interpret reality. That's why they didn't let the common people read the Bible. Well, the printing press changed that. We got to read the Bible, and we recognized, hey, these guys are full of crap. Nothing they do or say comes from the Bible. These people are just arrogant power freaks. They're basically using this claim to have divine knowledge as a tool to oppress. And I see what they did was they recognized we're losing power, so how do we stay in power? Well, they infiltrated the schools. The Jesuits started all these educational institutions and began brainwashing people again, and they're still teaching us heliocentrism today, and nobody seems to recognize, except for flat earthers, that yeah, this is not science, it's a religion. And the whole purpose of the Counter-Reformation was, how does the church maintain its stranglehold on the worldview of mankind? Well, that's how they did it. This is a 500-year deception that is just a reboot of an older system that we can trace back. We can trace it back 2,000 years, but if you look at the iconography and the symbolism and the worship of Baal or Baal, it goes back to Babylon.
I mean, this is something that's answered so many points that just made absolutely no sense to me. I mean, you've got Jaronism explaining how he went to a Jesuit-run school, and he's being absolutely taught about the heliocentric model by priests, by Jesuit priests, and they're all for it. They're explaining it in detail. They're very well educated in the system. And on the flip side of that, I've got myself with an uncle who's a pastor who's out debating, atheists about the Bible. So it's kind of, it appears on the surface to be set in opposition, but then you find out that the Jesuits are actually teaching it, and they're the ones who put it into the system in the first place. So it never made sense until you have explained what you've explained there. But what I was trying to lead you on to sort of say was about the hydra. I'm sure that word
Oh
will be
yes,
enough.
yes. Well, that's oh yeah, that's right. We were talking about because the Jews. So what I've concluded here is that, yeah, even though the Jews are being scapegoated in this movement, and that does distract everyone from Rome, it doesn't absolve Judaism at all, or Jews, or Zionism, or anything for their part in this deception, or Freemasonry, which many have described Freemasonry as Judaism for Gentiles, and I can't really argue with that. It's a little bit more eclectic. It has a Christian branch, it has a branch, the Shriners, they worship Allah, but it's all the same Abrahamic system. So what I realize is that we're dealing with a big mind control system that has many different facets or heads, like heads of a hydra, which if you read the descriptions of Babylon, it describes it as this many-headed beast. And so I chose hydra. So the way I see it, the Judaistic head, you have Judaism as one head, Christianity as another head, then you have Islam as another head, and then heliocentrism as another head, Freemasonry as another head. So it's this overall system. And then the other thing that I realized is that there are no atheists on flat Earth. You cannot be an atheist if you believe in heliocentrism. That's you basically just, I mean, to be an atheist means that you have to reject accepting anything on faith. And unfortunately, a lot of these atheists have been deceived just as the rest of us have been. So no, there are no atheists. They got us all. This is such a clever deception. It is so deep and so deeply entrenched and deeply rooted that it's a miracle that we've come this far as having this thing exposed. And it's only because of the modern incarnation of the movable type press, the internet. If it wasn't for the
Right.
internet,
So
we wouldn't have had this. In fact, the very fact that we got away with the original Reformation and the movable type was in spite of the best efforts of the church to stop everyone, because the first people to translate the Bible into English were burned at the stake. They literally had their handwritten Bibles wrapped around their necks and they were torched. The first one who did it, his name was John Wycliffe. He was one of the predecessors to Martin Luther. The church had his bones dug up, pounded into dust, and then thrown into a river so that there'd be no way to mark his grave. That shows you the contempt that these elitists have for those of us who are arrogant enough to think that we can handle the truth without it being mediated by people with these big funny fish god hats.
yeah, same goes for Tyndale. He translated the Bible without all the bravado, and I think they burnt him at the stake.
Right, right. And that's what they're doing today. If you go through any of their texts and you question it, look how people react to you. They're like, how dare you have an interpretation of reality different from what the priesthood today would have you believe? It's a form of like blasphemy to say the world is flat. It's like the same thing as saying Jesus didn't die on the cross. That would have gotten you killed.
Well,
Well,
I'm pretty sure Matt Paula made this point that there's some law. I haven't double checked this, but I'm just going to say what he said, which was to say that it's there's a law to say that you can't hold the globe in disrepute, or disrepute, is that the right word?
sure.
Yeah. So there's a law stopping you from essentially blaspheming the globe, which is astonishing. It really affirms the fact that it is a piece of religious iconography.
Oh, you're
So,
right. And there have been moves, even in the UN, rumblings on how can we criminalize criticism of global warming. And even Bill Nye, the scientism guy, has made this case. He has said, if you don't believe in global warming and you don't vote to increase the power of the state to solve this problem, you're putting 6 billion people's lives in danger. So you ought to be locked up. They've already made the case that criticizing global warming is blasphemy. And that to me is pretty much proof that what we're dealing with here is a religious system, because global warming isn't a scientific fact. It is a conviction. It's a religious conviction. It's eschatology. It is an apocalypse scenario. And one other thing about Ball Earth that I found kind of interesting is the way the elite play with words and everything, is that the obelisk is the symbol. You see it in front of like the Pope's, St. Peter's Square. He has the obelisk that he prays to. That's the symbol for this ancient deity Baal. That's the phallic god. You see his eye in the triangle. Well, the god, and it's actually the triangle is the Trinity. It refers to Isis, Osiris, and Horus, or it refers to, Jehovah, Mary, Jesus. It's a Trinity thing, right? But the obelisk hasn't been an ancient symbol of this fertility god. And I recognize that all of these rocket launches that are being done by NASA and SpaceX, those are obelisks. And what does the obelisk do? The obelisk is Baal worship. What does a rocket do? It reinforces belief in the Baal earth. You see? And the word Baal means Lord. That's the name of the god, Lord.
So you've got the
So,
angle tilting towards Baal, and the word itself means exactly that.
yeah. And so we have all been indoctrinated into ancient Babylonian mystery school religion. And this is the sick part of it. You know, we've all been born into this thing, and we're so deep into it that you have even atheists don't know, hey, you are a religious fundamentalist. Like Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's a religious fundamentalist, as is all the other pop scientists and all these people who claim to know better. And all these famous atheists like Christopher Hitchens, who died not knowing he was a religious nutcase. Richard Dawkins, they're not atheists, not at all.
Yeah,
They are
that was who
actually,
my uncle debated. I couldn't remember his name, Richard Dawkins. That was the guy who my pastor uncle went and debated. And of course, they reached the point of the Big Bang, and that was kind of the end of the conversation, because they've reached their respective gods. You know, that was the end of where they can go with each conversation. But you know,
I
they
may have
can't.
seen that. What's your uncle's name? Your pastor uncle's name?
Adrian Hawkes. I did a little
I
interview with him, and he told me during the interview. I wasn't aware until he actually told me during the interview. But yeah, it's going back probably 3 years
now
now that he debated him.
now here's like the big trick though. The big trick is we have to understand the word statism, because what we're looking, or stateolatry, which is when sun worship was the official state religion of the Roman polytheists. It's the official state religion. Well, if the state religion has you worshiping a sun god who is basically said to be incarnated in your leader, in the king, then by worshiping the king, you're worshiping the state, and it's state worship. And so if you believe in the globe and globalism, you're actually engaging in stateolatry. So even atheistic liberal progressives are worshiping the state. It's government as God. And that's essentially what we're stuck in. Government as God. It's government worship.
Well, we've moved nicely on to the next thing I was going to come on to, which is the Who. And although we've looked at the boogeyman that is the devil a little bit, I'd like to go into that a little bit further, because I think it needs it. There's definitely a justification to explain that for people who are brainwashed about that concept. But well, maybe start there. Yes. So we've got this idea that the devil is real and that you're being led into these things. Before we come on to the Who, can just it's something that I've tried to do for a couple of years, dispel the myth that there's the boogeyman, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the concept of Satan is basically it's this scapegoat where it's like you blame, who pushes the belief in Satan. Like, for example, if you didn't pray the church's prayers, if you prayed to your own idol at your house, you'd be considered a witch. In other words, they demonize the non-conformer. So Satan is really just this boogeyman they create, a way of saying if you don't conform, you're evil. It's a construct, but it's interesting how, because people believe in this futurism and this belief that the coming Antichrist is going to come deceive us all, they fall for all of this mind control programming that they put all throughout the media. So instead of recognizing that the true source of our oppression, our bondage, this mass deception, instead of recognizing that it comes from this hydra, we're all basically directed, our attention is directed to this mythical figure with pitchfork and a tail and horns who doesn't exist. It's a literary creation. And here's the tricky thing, and my best explanation for this is to refer to the movie The Village, where people are born in this commune. They don't know that there's a world outside of it, because in the woods, there are these devils running around and they can't leave. Well, in the movie, spoiler alert, they find out that the elite who set up the commune put on devil costumes and creep around in the woods at night. Well, that's what the church does. In order to keep us in their commune, in their one world order religion, in their in their paradigm, they dress up as devils. They spook everyone into the fold. And it's like, well, if you really look at it historically, who are the ones marrying off little girls? Who are the ones enforcing serfdom and slavery, committing all the atrocities, the religious wars? Who are the pederasts in high places? It's not the devil. It's the ones who worship the sun god, and also the polytheistic system. So the eye in the triangle, and this is one of the points people need to get. The eye in the triangle is Baal. It's Jehovah. It's Apollo. It's Horus. It's basically the god of the elite, and it's not Satan, because Satan doesn't exist. And as long as they get
Oh,
you thinking in this,
I've got to bring you back on track now, because what you've just done is just, I'm trying to bring you onto the who, and
oh,
I will just lead you and say, in doing so, I want you to boil it down to, these are just men, these are just people. But
oh,
what you've just
good.
described is sort of Baal and, you know,
Yeah,
Jupiter.
I know what you mean. Okay, yeah, this is actually a good point, because if you study like ancient alien theories, you see this, you get this notion, or if you study David Icke, for example, you'll get this narrative that suggests that at some point these gods, like the Elohim, came down from heaven and they established their priesthood on earth. So we have this ruling elite who are in fact bloodline descendants of these beings from above. And what I've come to recently is that no, this is a template where the elites pose as gods. Like the old, there's this like stereotypical image of the witch doctor saying, "Give me your virgins or the volcano god's going to erupt and destroy all your crops." It's all this mind game like the Wizard of Oz. So no, there aren't actually, there's no Horus, there's no Baal, there's no Jehovah, there's no gods in this sense. These are just Wizard of Oz holographic, it's like a hologram pageantry, fire and smoke, a lot of ceremony and pomp, but ultimately it's just a bunch of old perverts behind a curtain who figured out how to manipulate the masses. And when they established these systems, it was imposed. You didn't have a choice not to believe in it. Like when Christianity was imposed on the Jews that Titus Flavius conquered, they didn't have the choice not to believe in it. And so I make the point that no, these aren't aliens, they're not archons, they're not actual gods. It's a group of humans who figured out how to take control over people. Another good movie to look at is Apocalypse Now, where this this captain kind of goes off the reservation in Cambodia and he finds this group of indigenous people who are very primitive. He comes in as a 6'6" white guy who's like, "I'm a god," and he sets himself up as a god. Now think about it. If they worship him as a god king and then he has a kid, his kid is now a royal blood and it gets passed down. So what I'm saying is that religions are nothing more than a way of anthropomorphizing government and establishing a ruling class that can rule over a slave class. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, well, the people themselves, they're human. I'll grant you that, but they are different to a lot of people, and this is something that I think is a very, very important thing. The who of the story, who is deceiving us, is crucial. Not as quite important as the why, but still very, very important. And these people are psychopathics. They are psychopathic people. They are psychopaths. My apologies. And that's something that you've emphasized quite a lot in your videos, and that very much resonates with me, because of the types of deceptions that we see are very much the types of deceptions that would come from psychopaths, and indeed their motivation, their ends to keep control, is a very psychopathic way of being. So again, maybe you can touch on
Sure.
your experiences
Yeah.
or how you've come to that conclusion also.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one of the things about the god that they instituted, like whether it's Jupiter or Jehovah, if you actually look at the character of this god, forget all the propaganda that says he's all forgiving, all loving. Look at how Jehovah behaved. Look at how Jupiter behaved. And if you look at all these characteristics of these gods, what you find is that they instituted a narcissistic personality disordered individual as like the archetypical lord that everyone has to obey. And so narcissism is basically when a person lacks empathy. And in order to interact with a narcissist, you have to essentially humble yourself. You have to get on your knees. You have to be a codependent. It's a master slave relationship. So they have instituted a narcissistic personality into government. And the way that it works is if you're a ruler, if you're a part of the ruling elite and you see yourself as better than those beneath you, that is an inherently psychopathic relationship. It shows a lack of empathy. You're no longer seeing each other as equals. It is a system of control, and it's all about domination. And in fact, the word domination, I like to look at the etymology of these things. And Jupiter's symbol, King Jupiter was the dome, his dominion. It's the dome, the Capitolium. And so I basically say that, yeah, it is a psychopathic system. And so even if you're not a psychopath, you're not a psychopath, but if you were to be in the position of a king or a pope ruling over a slave class, you would inherently be a psychopath. It's just the office. That's the nature of the dynamic.
Well, this has been given a term by someone I'm a big fan of. He's a very much anti-flat Earth proponent,
Sheridan.
but Thomas Sheridan calls that type of person a proto-psychopath. And I would maybe categorize your namesake, the other Tim Osman, as a proto-psychopath. In other words, he has many psychopathic traits and will do psychopathic things, possibly because he's been in the presence of psychopaths. I have no idea how he's attributed those traits. But there are many people who, although they're not, they still have narcissistic qualities. Everybody has narcissistic qualities. It's a sort of sliding scale, but we're talking about people who demonstrate it to a massive degree. They have very, very little empathy. But then there's this other type of person you're describing, which is somebody who does have empathy. There's no doubt about it, but they have assimilated all of the characteristics of psychopaths because they are in a psychopathic system. In other words, that is their way to be.
If you're born an aristocrat, you're not allowed to mix with the slaves. You're not allowed to breed with the slaves. They keep them separate for that reason. It's to keep this system going. And so, yeah, for those who haven't studied Thomas Sheridan, a psychopath means you're born as someone who lacks empathy, and you're therefore a dangerous, psychotic, or dangerous, evil person or whatever. But a proto-psychopath is someone who lives as one, who has adopted those as cultural traits, but isn't necessarily lacking empathy. Like, for example, if you go into the military, you may actually have to go murder a bunch of people, but you may not even be a psychopath. It's just that you have to engage in this role in order to fulfill a job. And that's why you have people with PTSD. If you have actual empathy and you have to contradict that and you have to behave contrary to your nature, it is very damaging. And so, yeah, what I'm saying is that this is a psychopathic control system, and it doesn't matter who you are. If you're in that system, you're becoming a proto-psychopath. And I've been saying this about
and that analogy is used as the Matrix. The psychopathic control system, as you've just phrased it, is the Matrix. So there's not this, I don't know, I don't want to go into slamming simulation theory too much, but it's kind of used in that way to transpose between the two, whereas in reality we do have a control structure, we do have a psychopathic control grid, we do have a matrix, but it is just the system around us that we're exposing now in this conversation, as opposed to some ethereal network of cables with me with the thing plugged in the back of my head. That's not what it is.
Right, exactly, which is why I want to demystify it, because I want to show that this is a system that we can actually overthrow. And if you look at the American Revolution, it was nothing more than a group of people recognizing, hey, why are we kneeling to these kings whose authority comes from what? An ancient system that's antiquated, outmoded, and they figured, hey, let's just do this. Let's say our rights come from our creator, no king, so they're inalienable rights. And it took a lot of it took a revolutionary war to make this happen. And I'm saying that freedom itself is an anomaly. It's the exception to the rule. And if you look at it, it was compromised from the beginning, and we've been losing it more and more as the years have gone by. And you can kind of see that what was established in this country was meant to be an actual free country for free people. And it's essentially been corrupted. I mean, you could put Captain America in the Oval Office, and he would still be governing as a psychopath, as a member of the ruling elite.
Sure. And what you're kind of illustrating with what you're saying here is that regardless of flat Earth, this overall concept that we're describing in this very small corner of the internet, there is a much wider reaching implication to knowing flat Earth. And even knowing it, you have to work your way around the pre-programming, the ridicule that's been put in place that sort of stops you just bringing it up. You mentioned earlier about using bubbles in space as your angle rather than the words flat Earth when you bring this up, because people know when their pocket's being picked much more than they know that their very reality has been changed around them.
Yes.
People will notice a £5 note going missing quicker than they'll notice reality being changed. It's amazing to think, but true.
Yeah, sadly, we do. We have to appeal to the self-interest of these people, because I'm doing this. I don't care about my tax dollars so much. It's just like I'm thinking about future generations and the pattern. And the pattern is, if we don't recognize what we're living in right now is a reformation, and we have an opportunity to get out from under the system and overthrow it, if we don't, it's guaranteed that future generations are going back into bondage, back into serfdom, back into this ball illusion, and it's just going to get more and more convincing. They'll never get out of it, and this will only give the elite more and more power to define reality. And as you were saying, so it's no longer just about flat versus spherical, which I think is a false dichotomy. I think it's about open versus enclosed, or free versus enslaved. So this is a freedom versus slavery issue. And yeah, they use all kinds of taboos and this concept of blasphemy to keep us from even questioning what we've been told.
Okay, so where do you think we actually go from here then? I know you've got your short-term plan that you've detailed, but as a group, obviously we're going to potentially unite, but you've said that this might be a slow release. So if we are being divided and conquered, potentially uniting might not be us uniting. Do you see where I'm going with
Yeah,
this?
exactly. Because they divide and conquer and they unite to rule. And yeah, so this is what I came across. I started realizing that it could very well be that we're not in an enclosed system, or there's more land. But that, see, here's the thing, more land fundamentally changes the dynamic. Like, for example, people wanted to get away from the king, pilgrims. They were able to go somewhere else and achieve self-governance. And if we have a new world order, there is no more self-governance. There's nowhere to run. We're all bowing to the same system. And so that's why I'm saying it seems to me that by their MO and by the pattern, they're probably hiding something from us. But regardless, if we don't change the status quo, if we don't, then ultimately we're going back into another dark age. And it seems to me that where we go from here is anti-statism. It's basically this: a recognition that centralized power is the enemy, and we have to recognize that our government has been utterly and totally corrupted. Like I said, we don't have a separation of church and state. It's a theocratic system run by technocrats. And it seems to me that and I'm not trying to get into the whole dome versus infinite plane thing, but the reason why I started this whole concept of dome wars is that, what if there's not a dome? What if there is more land, but they can trick us into there being a dome? Well, then they maintain the status quo. And so that's why I've been so against the dome. It just seems to me, if there is any belief that would be very convenient for the powers that should not be, it's the belief that there's no more places to go. And it also seems to me that they could easily sacrifice heliocentrism and put us back under a one world system if they could get all the religions in the world to unite. And the more I study the papacy and his connection to the United Nations, it seems like they're trying to build this world religion where it's where everyone is willingly not being deceived into it, but they're all worshiping the Pope because he somehow, it's really, I don't know if they're going to do it by a matter of like Project Bluebeam, but if you look at the way that people who are hardcore brainwashed fall for miracles, it's pretty sad. Look at the Fatima prophecies. These three little girls say they saw the sun change colors, and then millions of people flock in pilgrimage. They make these pilgrimages to that site. And now these girls are like saints, and it's been recognized as a miracle. And I'm like, well, the elite know that they want to rule over superstitious people, not free thinkers. And they're making the calculation, is it going to be cheaper to get rid of all the free thinkers and rule over a bunch of sheep, or to change our paradigm? See, that's the thing. They're not going to let this go without a fight. And I kind of see religion as the enemy, whether it's religion of the globe or religion of the cross, religion of the star and crescent. Any religious system is the enemy, because religion is nothing more, as I said, it's a way to get people to worship government. All religions are ultimately state-olatry, to the extent that they're filtered through one of their holy books.
I mean, we're now going to get into something that I didn't know if we'd get to this stage. I thought we'd maybe just cover a lot of the things you've covered in your videos, but now we're going to get into maybe a disagreement. So you've got a concept that you will push often, and I asked you this in your chat, which is about the creator. And I've asked lots of people, and I've got answers like it's self-evident and things of that nature. But why? Why do you feel that it's self-evident that there's a creator?
Oh, okay. Well, since I was even a teenager, I've always had a strong intuition, precognitions, instances of telepathy. And as I began to study mysticism, mystical experiences, synchronicity, Carl Jung, I started to become more aware of this type of thing. And I would have so many synchronicities that it was clear that I'm being guided by something that transcends my five senses, transcends my body. I'm not saying it's something external. What I think it is a connection to my soul. And I think that when you unplug from the matrix, you reconnect to your own soul. And the fact that I've had these synchronicities, you can't have 5 or 6 or 7 significant, meaningful coincidences in a day with the current laws of physics as we understand it. It defies probability. Some of these synchronicities, if you know what I'm talking about, it's just a meaningful coincidence that seems to be guiding you somewhere. And that type of stuff made me realize that there is something transcendent about this. And that alone to me says, yeah, that we are spiritual beings in physical bodies. We're having this physical experience, and it looks like the elite know this. So if they can cut us off from our souls, they can treat us as physical objects. They want to turn us into animals, is what they want to do. And that's what evolution is. It's taking your soul out of you. Heliocentrism is a religion where man has no soul. Man is an accident. That's why every atheist will say, oh, we're just on an insignificant planet around a dying sun, and we have no souls, and we're just egotistical monkeys. That's their way of trashing us and tearing us down and cutting us off of the fact that, no, we are spiritual beings. And so I see religion as just a way for government to get us to take our natural spirituality and plug it into them. Like they're hijacking it. And that's why I call them parasites. They're not just taking our money. They're cutting us off from our connection to our creator, to our real self, our true, unique, spiritual identity.
Okay, I mean, I will come to the Dome Wars. I know you said you didn't want to touch on it, but tough. So you've got this idea that comes across that you feel that they will fall back on religion. That is to say that should the globe iconography fail, they will just fall back on the cross. And I don't necessarily see things in that way based on my understanding of how psychopaths operate, which is to say that yes, they recycle, absolutely, but they would also repackage. And for me, I would look at places like CERN, and only because they're talking with words like God, for where the new rebranding and repackaging has come. And I'm not 100% sure if the audience will have got from this conversation what I've got after watching a lot of your videos, which is to say that I'm sure I have already, that I didn't see the connection between how the globe, a map effectively, had anything to do with the cross. But now that I do see it, I hope it's obvious in what we've discussed already. It's getting that idea that Mark Sargent said it as well, that it would come out like the good silver, I think he said. And I don't know, I don't really see that happening, but maybe you still see it that way. I don't know.
You're right about psychopaths and pathological liars. Their tendency is never to come clean and say, yeah, I lied. Here's how I lied. Here's how I tricked you. No, they always double down. They double down on their gaslighting. That's absolutely true. And for those of you, by the way, those who have a difficult time understanding how I equate the cross with the globe, that's why I use the figure of Atlas as my avatar, because the globe is a burden that locks you in place. You can't move. Atlas is stuck, and the cross, you're stuck. It's all about transfixing you and holding you down in place. But now, do I see them going back to the dome? Unfortunately, the only way they could do it is if they've already built their Inquisition. They just haven't had the power to use it yet. 9/11 is when they really, I think, built the infrastructure of it. They know all of us. They know all people who have deviated from their narratives, who have escaped their little matrix. And it seems to me that if they wanted to maintain a stranglehold of power and bring us back into the fold of Mother Church, which has been the stated objective since the Reformation, since the Council of Trent, the Jesuits have sworn an oath to get everybody back into the church. And if you read the oath, it is nasty. It talks about stopping at nothing, whether it's murdering, lying, raping, pillaging, torturing. They have no morals. They're absolute psychopaths. If you read their oaths, read the oath of the Jesuit order. It is a psychopathic oath. It's basically like, it's like if you can imagine a bunch of, well, I mean, that's what it is. It's just a psychopathic cult. And it seems to me that if they make, let's say they do a calculation, they're going to say, well, we've got 10 million people here who are skeptics. and the rest are going to go with the flow. Let's just kill the 10 million. I mean, look at the gulags. Look at Soviet Russia. Look at what all the communist regimes have done. Look at the 210 plus million skulls, you know, in the last 100 years alone, from collectivistic, utopian, government-centric religions, like, you know, whether you want to call it socialism, communism, fascism. That's the types of people we're dealing with. And I think it would be easier for them to murder us all after having some type of a crisis, and then to take back control of the paradigm and lock it down again, than to cede any ground at all. So I don't put anything past them.
I can almost hear the cognitive dissonance kicking in a lot of people. You know, we experience this on our TVs in terms of the propaganda, and we try and debunk it. But on the other hand, there is very real wars. You know, they are absolutely capable of just wiping us all out, and I don't doubt that. I can only smile because I'd be in tears and weeping if it wasn't the case.
Inquisition, remember, the Jesuits, Inquisition, like, okay, all they needed to know is who isn't thinking right, because they're thought police. Like, if you read 1984, 1984 is all about thought policing, and we're living in the world created by an insider. In his book, George Orwell, he was totally an insider. He knew how the system worked. And every single person who adopts the globe as a reality has accepted that 2 + 2 = 5, which means they believe whatever their authorities say. And if there's more believers than thinkers, then we're screwed. And the Jesuits are now, it's a high-tech order now. Now they have, I mean, they could literally send out drones to every disbeliever's home and just take us all out in one strike. And I hate to sound morbid about it, but, you know, if you read the Black Book of Communism, if you read about how nasty and evil these people are, I really think they would gleefully do this. And you look at all these illustrations of the Inquisition and their instruments of torture. I mean, I kind of think that they're bloodthirsty. And if you read, okay, this is sick, but if you read Aleister Crowley's Book of the Law, and he was an insider, and he was not a Satanist. He worshipped Apollo. He worshipped Horus. He saw himself as Christ incarnate. Aleister Crowley wrote this book, which he claims was dictated from an angel or a demon, however you want to look at it. And in it, he said, hey, we're going to have a one world order for the new age, but it's going to mean that the earth has to be bathed in blood 3 times. And some say that's World War I, World War II. And one more time, they need to bathe this thing in blood to take total power. And I think that's what we're waiting for. If we don't stop it.
Will you concede that that's complete nonsense? That's just made up crap by men to justify more nonsense?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, it's just a textbook thing. Aleister Crowley created a cult knowing how the system worked. I mean, he was an insider. Some say he was an intelligence agent. You know, Aleister Crowley started off with a $6 million budget. His parents were very wealthy, and he moved in all the right circles. And yeah, absolutely, it's all made up. It's all gibberish. But I mean, if you read the Book of the Law, you can see it's gibberish. But in the book, he talks about this. They sell it. I mean, here's the thing: people who believe in that particular the New Age faith, they see that as okay. So they don't have a problem with it. It's like, oh well, the world's gonna be bathed in blood again. No, that's not a good thing. But I see it as very likely that yeah, that's something they would do to hold on to their power.
Well,
and that's why I think this is more than just.
Give me a nice new segue, which is into how the elites will write themselves in. They will have themselves part of the prophecy, so to speak. I mean, the example, I'll just steal it, I'm sorry, but was about the beast breaking down. Well, you can tell the story.
Oh, sure. Yeah, this starts with the backdating of the myth. So, and, you know, I'm not trying to be offensive to people who believe in anything, but you know, we have to remember that the globe is a religion. So if you say the world's flat, that's pretty much a very offensive thing. So what I'm going to say now shouldn't be offensive. But when Christianity was created, they wrote Revelations. They wrote a prophecy that would say the beast is going to come. He's going to conquer Jerusalem, and the world will worship him. He's 666. He's going to be the one to follow after me. Jesus said, it's not me, it's the Son of Man who comes after in one generation, which is 40 years. So if you go AD 33, add 40 years, 73, that's when Jerusalem was conquered. So it looks like Jesus did in fact prophesize that his successor would conquer Jerusalem in 40 years. And many Christians will say, hey, that's proof. Jesus was telling the future. No, sorry. Titus had the book written after he conquered Jerusalem, and then he backdated the publication date 40 years in order to write himself into the myth to say, hey, look, Like in the Bible, they used to include a little history book at the end by Josephus Flavius. It was called The Roman War with the Jews. And in that book, it basically was something you'd read side by side with the Gospels, and you'd be able to read it and say, hey, wait, this is the history, this is the prophecy, so clearly this is a real book. So they write themselves into the myths, they deify themselves. And you see this also, this is what I think the ancient alien theories, like Zachariah Stitchin. Well, Zachariah Stitchin was a 33rd degree Freemason, total insider. And what were they doing with these ancient alien myths, but writing themselves into the myths so that all the people today who believe in aliens, like Neil deGrasse Tyson says, you must believe in aliens. All atheists find it plausible. Even Joe Rogan has admitted aliens are basically gods for atheists. Well, if the elite can convince us that aliens exist, then they can make the case that, hey, those of us who've been ruling over you, yeah, we're actually related to them, the sky gods. Same story, new nomenclature, scientific veneer. Template, in other words, it's a template.
Well, they always dress these things up with maths, and I'm going to steal the words from Cathexis, who's a friend of yours as well, is he not? But Cathexis calls it mathematically prescribed sun worship, which I think is a really nice turn of phrase.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And I like phrases like that because we need to be able to boil this down into a way that it can be understood, because it's not obvious. And it shouldn't be obvious. We shouldn't expect any of this to be obvious or to come easy, given how long this thing has gone on. I mean, we're
Yeah,
looking
well,
at
Sharon says this often as well, which is that it's a deception. And to go to Google and just type in, I had this conversation earlier today about vaccines, slightly different topic, but I was explaining that there was a link between vaccines and autism, and they had already read about it, my sister and brother-in-law, and explained the debunking to me. And I'm like, well, okay, yes, that's absolutely out there, but you have to appreciate how deception works. They, of course, wouldn't just leave it hanging out there. It's a nonsense, and that maybe this is a bit ham-handed. So you're going to the council meeting and you're going to present something that, like with all heliocentric debunkings, it's like the cracks in the pavement. They often come along and fill them in. And in some ways, I feel that, maybe us in this small corner of the internet, we're here to expose some of these cracks so they can just smear a new debunking on top. So there's a potential. It's already happened, because you've declared it. There's people out there saying, well, look, this is how they explain away the bubbles. So, yeah. I mean, how will you square that circle if confronted with it in your 2 minutes?
Yeah, that's a good one. And, well, first of all, on the topic of vaccines, this is something I've thought about too. They don't have to have poison in it today. They could do it they could just test it, spot test it here and there. But I think what they want is they want to have the infrastructure there so that once they get you used to accepting a yearly vaccine, mandatory basis, doesn't hurt you, like, look, doesn't hurt me, then all it takes is one contaminated dose and they can get the job done. So I think they want to get us used to accepting needles in the arm from Big Daddy government. And then when they need to pull the plug on us, they can. So I think it is a very real danger when it talks about compulsive vaccinations. But so we don't even have to make a one-to-one connection between vaccines and autism to see that there's a danger in letting the government under your skin. And I remember when I think it was in anthropology or something, my very first lecture, the professor he debunked this vaccine autism thing. And I'm like, why do they make that like the number one thing they tell you? Well, it's because they're brainwashing you to be comfortable with Big Brother sticking needles in you. But a little side track there. But now as to the city hall and the bubbles in space, the reason I think bubbles in space works is that there is enough content on there to raise a few eyebrows. And it's more than just the bubbles. It's more than that. There's a lot with regards to the ISS that shows it's probably fraudulent. And I think it's important to get people to understand that we're putting blind faith. And I'm going to use the word malfeasance. There's no reason for NASA to get 19.5 billion when we're undergoing this massive healthcare crisis. And I think that I just want to get it into the public record. And I also want to see what happens. It's sort of a test, because if I can get anywhere with this thing, others can follow suit. And then we can find out other ways of getting into the public record, getting this into, basically, we have to hold our elected officials accountable, but they will laugh at flat Earth. So I figured, well, if I can draw attention to the ISS, and at the very end I'll say, Google bubbles in space. That's the meme. That's the Trojan horse meme that contains all the information that they need to hear. Because you have to package things into sound bites. That's the way you communicate to the media. That's how you get messages through the filters. You have to get it into a sound bite, Trojan horse style, get it through the enemy gates, and then, like the Trojan horse, the soldiers come out and they sack Troy.
Can we talk? You're a brilliant guest because you keep giving me these nice segues. So now maybe if I just mention Joe Rogan in terms of your, your PR work with that particular individual, maybe you can lead on from there.
Oh yeah, Joe Rogan. Well, yeah, one of the things going forward, and I'm not trying to pitch my book, but I put out a book called Flat Earth Activist because it was my way of getting all my ideas on paper. In case I got distracted and I couldn't participate in this thing, I wanted to get my ideas out there. And but in the book, I talk about
who's the author? What's the pen name?
I use the name Tim Osman, Ozman. And in the book, I talk about the need for iconoclasm, which is breaking the idols of your enemy. And that's how we have to approach this. So idols are, these things that are held up to be sacred and that you're not allowed to question. Sacred cows. I talk about tipping the sacred cows. Well, Joe Rogan's an idol. The reason why he is where he is that he has state-sanctioned opinions. And he's very popular with certain demographics. And so if he says, this idea is dumb, this idea is good, his followers will follow him because they don't want to be laughed at by Joe Rogan because they admire and respect him. And so he's an idol. So we have to attack the idols. So we have to basically poke holes in Joe Rogan and show him for the shill that he is. And so iconoclasm means, yeah, we got to attack the globe, attack the ISS, but also attack other people who have been given this sort of veneer of like you can't attack them, like the astronauts. Like Neil Armstrong is less of an astronaut than William Shatner because all they do is they get in front of the camera and simulate space environments. Well, Captain Kirk did way more of that than this one-trick pony Neil Armstrong who just went to the moon once. Captain Kirk went everywhere. So I'm like, well, let's attack these idols. Let's say, hey, Neil Armstrong was not an astronaut. He was handing out polished turds to the Holland government saying it was moon rocks, and people believed it. And so we have to attack their idols and show that, no, there's nothing sacred. It's okay to say the world's flat. It's okay to say NASA lies. It's okay to say Neil deGrasse Tyson is not the smartest guy in the room. He's a fraud. He's a charlatan. He's a buffoon. And that's why I like memes. Meme warfare, using memes to denigrate our enemies or the proxies of our enemies, these sellouts, that's iconoclasm. And that's a big part of the book, The Flat Earth Activist, is engaging in iconoclasm. And I draw this from, if you look at even Martin Luther in the Reformation, the way he challenged the church was, he didn't burn down a church. No, he wrote down a list of 95 problems he had with the church, and he publicly nailed it to the door so everyone could read it. And a statement like that does a lot more than a simple destructive act. It's a symbolic act of destroying a symbol or a person who embodies something.
Okay, so we've got characters like Joe Rogan, but we've also got other people that you will attack, like the InfoWars crew. And I'll come on to some of the people who are actually in our small sphere of influence in Flat Earth. But if we stick just for the time being to the people that you would critique in this, what do you call it? This like it's definitely not mainstream when we're talking InfoWars. What would you call that?
Well, yeah, the thing about InfoWars I think is fascinating is that they're supposed to be alternative media, but they're totally controlled opposition.
That's
and
what
I didn't realize
alternative media. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Alex Jones is if he's like 80% truth and then he hides the most important stuff. He's a gatekeeper. And this was this was very evident last week, or 2 weeks ago. He had Eddie Bravo on his show, and 3 times Eddie Bravo brought up Eric Dubay, and every time he said the name Eric Dubay, Alex Jones said, "Can we get Dr. Kent Hovind on the show?" And Eddie Bravo was saying, "Let's get Eric Dubay on here. He's a flat earther who doesn't believe in dinosaurs." Alex Jones is saying, "Let's get Kent Hovind on, who is a globehead. He's an anti-flat earther who believes in dinosaurs." So I'm like, wait, that is just straight up 180 degrees from the truth, gatekeeping. And so I would consider, I wouldn't even consider Alex Jones to be alternative media anymore. He's just controlled opposition. It's the real media is this. It's us. The real media now, it is the people's media, as the Clintons called it in the 90s. In the 90s, you can read these White House memos where they were saying, hey, if this internet gets out of control, we're going to have to compete with the people's media. Because we have to remember that the global, we say liberal media, progressive media, mainstream media. No, it's actually globalist media. That's how we need to think of it, because they're advancing globalism. And
If I put a slightly different angle on it, then, so before we went live, we were talking about the people who were in flat Earth and saying that they could go on a path that led them into certain traps that meant that their information was incorrect, but it didn't necessarily mean that they were bad people. It just meant that they fell into traps. Would you not say that the same exact thing would apply to people like Alex Jones?
you know, I would have believed so. It could be the case. However, the thing is that his see, I gave him the benefit of the doubt until this thing with Eddie Bravo came out. Until that came out. I mean, he's kind of grudgingly allowed his proxies, his surrogates, to talk about flat Earth, and even then, it was 3 against 1, and they're all laughing at Eddie Bravo. So at this point, you know, the thing is, the way that the elite have this arena set up, and the controlled opposition is basically you can do and say whatever you want, criticize whoever you want, as long as you don't let anyone get past this line. And that line is flat Earth. That is like the biggest thing that they cannot cross. I mean, Alex Jones even believes in psyops unless they're exposed by the people's media first. Like, for example, Sandy Hook. He didn't question that it was possible that nobody died until enough of his listeners forced him into it. So Alex Jones has to be dragged kicking and screaming to break with mainstream media narratives when it comes to psyops. And psyops are key. And it's one of the things I talk about in the Flat Earth Activist book, is that if people cannot understand a simple psyop like the Boston Hoaxathon or any of these other fake Islamic terrorist attacks, they're not going to see through the big one. And so psyops are important, psychological warfare operations, because the globe is a psyop. Those who say flat Earth is a psyop to discredit the truth movement, no. The globe is a 500-year-old psyop, and the entire truth movement is pretty much controlled opposition to the extent that it won't even contradict that.
Okay, I mean, I'll take that at face value and take it on one step to Eric Dubay. So I think it was today or yesterday you came out with a video that essentially said that Eric Dubay does not highlight the fact that this deception ultimately leads back to Rome and the Jews are just simply one head of a hydra. So would you say that that doesn't transpose onto Eric as well, or do you think it does?
Well, yeah, see, that's another one. Because one of the keys to there's been a long documented history of how the Jesuits operate and have operated. And one of the ways that their disinfo agents operate is they consistently scapegoat. And I'm not saying that the scapegoat is innocent. Like, I'm not saying that the Jews are innocent. I'm just saying that they're probably complicit in it to some extent. But Eric Dubay has been conspicuously, well, very careful about treading on Rome. Like, he says his narrative is this. And this is why I'm saying we have to focus on facts, not narratives, because narratives will corral people down certain paths. And so his path is all roads lead to Jews. He says that the Jews infiltrated the Vatican and took it over. And I'm like, no, the Vatican was organized evil long before the Jesuit order was founded. And the only reason why someone would consistently avoid talking about Rome after having seen so much, he's obviously researched this stuff, is if he was working for him. And just something hit me last night. I was reading some of Eric Dubay's comments on various videos, which were very much about blaming Jews. And it just kind of hit me because I watched his Jew World Order. And I'm not disputing there's a lot of bad stuff having to do with Talmudism and Jewry itself. But I'm also suggesting here is that to focus exclusively on one head of the hydra is to give victory to the beast, because the thing needs to be uprooted in total, not just one head. We don't just chop off one head. We don't just defeat the globe and then we win. No, we have to overthrow this entire system. And it just seems to me, I don't know. Last night I couldn't sleep. It was like 4 a.m. I was reading a lot of Eric Dubay's comments, and I've been trying to bait him for weeks now into talking about Rome, and he won't do it. He won't respond to my messages. I've been trying to provoke him into reacting. I've had him react to me, I think, in various proxies, not by his own name. And he'll say, because I've been saying, we need to get away from the 500-year timeline. And he's like, no, I've talked about Pythagoras, which was a long time ago. And I'm saying, no, I'm not talking just about the 500-year timeline. I'm talking about the fact that this deception has gone through many permutations throughout history, the globe just being the most recent. And so I called out Eric Dubay as a proxy, as a Jesuit coadjutor, as a basically he's working for them. And I hate to have to do that, but I've been left with no choice. Because I'd like to give him the benefit of the doubt, but he won't even confront the topic of Rome, and he has one of the biggest voices in this quote movement. And if he won't talk about Rome, if he won't talk about it being beyond just flat versus spherical, then he's controlled opposition. It's the Jesuit Masonic Hegelian dialectic. And that's
Yeah,
where
but
he's
I mean, we've
people.
just talked about the traps that people fall into. I mean, he might just be coming around. I mean, I've got a real bee in my bonnet. I may address this on future videos about people banning trolls, because there's two different types of trolls. There's a guy like me who will absolutely troll people, who hasn't got any more accounts than the ones that have got videos on. And once they're banned, that's it. I won't visit a channel again. But there's other types of trolls that will have hundreds and hundreds of accounts and will just keep reopening them over and over and over again in order to troll their message. But I know some of those trolls aren't government paid trolls. They're just Joe Blogs normal and are so absolutely offended by the idea of the globe that they want to troll. Now, given that that's the case and that's how we're manipulated, wouldn't it stand to reason that someone like Eric Dubay could also fall into a similar cognitive trap and then decide, because of his research path, that is definitely that head of the hydra is to blame, and therefore he will pump that message out because he's convinced himself, he's got confirmation bias, isn't? I mean,
That's
you're saying I'll give him
possible.
the benefit of the doubt, so
Sure. Like as Robert Anton Wilson said, he was a philosopher. He said, "What the thinker thinks, the prover proves." And then also, it does become a self-reinforcing echo chamber when, like, so for example, Rob Skiba has this view of Jehovah's terrarium, and so I'm not going to say he works for the Pope because he's trying to trap everyone in a dome. It's more likely that that fits within his community. It's become an echo chamber, and it self-reinforces, and it's basically like there's no reason to contradict it. And so it could very well be that Eric Dubay, by hitting upon the Jewish thing, really struck a chord with all of the white nationalists, the anti-Jews, and the Hitler lovers. And so maybe he has fallen into such a trap. And I've given him the benefit of the doubt, but that's why I put out this video last night. I'm honestly, I'm just trying to provoke him. I want to provoke him into addressing Rome. And if he doesn't, then it fits the blueprint of how Jesuit operatives work. And Jesuit operatives have a systematic way of dealing with these things. And it's all about scapegoating and misdirection and red herrings. And so it can only go on so long. And I've been pushing his button on the subject for so long that if he doesn't come around soon, yeah, I've pretty much come to this conclusion. And my intuition tells me the same.
no, that's fair enough. Everyone's got an opinion and all the rest of it. I mean,
But
I'm glad you've said that you're trying to provoke him, because, you've said in the past that you've got a good head for sales. You know how to therefore market things. And I had a similar, or in a roundabout way, we'll move on one step in terms of people now, with a conversation with Patricia along the same lines when you called her a dome sympathizer, I believe. And, she was outraged. So I don't believe in a dome, I'm just interviewing people. And I said, well, no, you're a face that is in this arena, and Tim Osman is using that to get his point across, and he's done it very effectively. In other words, don't take it personally. I don't know, maybe you actually think Patricia's well into the dome or something. I don't know. I'm just trying to take it on that one step in terms
right.
of the personalities without making it too much about Patricia specifically, or about
No, I know what you're saying.
Tim Osman specifically, the other one, or about Eric Dubay specifically, but about the concepts that surround some of the people like us and our perception of other people who, by degrees of separation, I'm sure Eric Dubay at the moment is probably only 1 or 2 degrees away from literally being in your presence at the moment.
Sure. No, and I think I'm not too flippant about the word shill. I think people are way too flippant throwing that term around. And I don't think it's a good word to use because, we're all basically seeking the same information. But what I started the Dome Wars just to be cautious about a consensus trumping truth where everyone just starts to kind of agree it's a dome. And if you contradict it, hey, why are you being a contrarian? Why can't you just go with the flow? And so I'm trying to make sure people don't fall for the trap of mistaking consensus for truth, because that's how this thing will fall apart. And I've been very critical of any big name. I mean, in a way, it's a compliment. If I've savaged somebody in a video or said something mean, it's because I recognize them as a force right now in how this thing comes
That's
out.
what I said. So I said to Patricia Steer precisely that. Take it as a compliment. You know, he's
But
not he's Laurie
I,
Ferrari. He's used you because it gets his point across better.
I can honestly say I've probably watched 50, 100, maybe more, 50 hours of Patricia Steer, her content. Great interviewer, good show format. And what I like about her show is that it's not all wonky like Eric Dubay. It's more like conversational, and what she's doing is actually pretty good. She's doing iconoclasm, which is there is this image of the flat earther as being someone who's basically stuck in the dark ages. They're dumb, they're just gullible, and they're probably basement dwellers, that kind of thing. And so what she does by getting people in front of the camera is she kind of breaks that apart. So she's actually done a lot for the movement, if you want to call it a movement, as far as breaking down this false image of the heretic, of the flat earther that has been built up by the elitists. So no, I think her show has done a great thing. I've been a little more critical of Mark Sargent because enclosed world, but then again, you can't really call someone a shill if his videos are so effective at packaging the information in a way to make it digestible for the first time somebody hears flat earth. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I'm not even really so much focused on that anymore at all anyway, because the fact is nobody's getting all of their information from one YouTuber. Everybody's doing their own research. And so it doesn't matter what your pet conclusion is, whether you think it's a manufactured planetarium or a terrarium invented by some benevolent god, an infinite plane. It doesn't matter. We're all on the same team insofar as we're participating in this move against the globe paradigm, which is a radical authoritarian and oppressive control system, as we've said, run by psychopaths. So we're all on the same team. And so I'm not really trying to bust anybody's balls right now, with the exception of Eric Dubay until he comes clean with regards to Rome.
Well, you are trying to bust someone's balls. So again, great guest. Thank
NASA's
you so
balls.
much. So you've had some fundraising activities recently.
Yeah, that's just comic relief. I was once I started putting out videos, Lord Stephen Christ arrives on my channel to tell me that the FEMA camps are after me. He sicked the NSA on me, and I need to kneel down and worship him as Lord. And I'm like, well, if you want me to accept you as Christ, you're going to have to prove it. And so I went on his channel during a live chat, and I tried to crowdsource money to crucify him. And he essentially said that he would chop my head off and urinate on my corpse if I tried. So I made a compromise. I said, that's fine. On Easter, I'm going to on Good Friday, I'm going to crucify you in effigy. And so I did set up a GoFundMe campaign, and I raised $100 for art supplies. And right now I'm working on it. And on Easter, I am going to crucify Lord Stephen Christ in effigy and put it on YouTube. And to me, it's just comic relief. The guy's a cyberbully. A lot of people think what I'm doing is fun. And so it's just meant to kind of, I mean, this is the thing. If somebody says that they're God, well, prove it. I'm not going to accept it on faith. And I think it's going to be fun because I've been trolled by so many of his followers.
Yeah, I think it's very good comic relief, and I hope he appreciates that it's all definitely just in good fun. So from concavers, though, to globetards, as you call them, how have you got on? And I'll preface that question, actually. So for me, I've at least reached the point where it's, accepted as being obvious, the flatness, I mean. And I think you're the same. You say everybody's a flat earther, whether they like it or not. I don't know if
Yes.
I'd go quite that far, because a lot of your reality is based on your belief system. So unfortunately, even though that may be strictly accurate, because the earth is flat, whether they like it or not, they are, for some, they are literally still in their mind's eye, still on a spinning ball. So I don't know if I can go as far as to say everybody's
Yeah.
everybody's a flat earther. Everyone, I see everyone around this campfire as being a flat earther. And you've got JLB critiquing a video that I think Validation Boy did recently. So there was some drama, and he had some of the guests that were involved onto his show to discuss the drama. And JLB's there in the comments critiquing it. And in essence, he's saying, I've got sucked back into this flat earth thing. But the people on the show, a couple of them at least, aren't flat earthers in their, in their verbiage. They would say they're definitely not, they're into the globe. I say no, because of people like JLB who make my point for me. They're saying, here I am looking at flat earth again. Well, what are you looking at? Someone who's on the globe side, someone who's on the flat earth side, but you're still looking at this all-encompassing thing called flat earth, and they're part of it. Therefore, flat earthers, whether they like it or not. So I can justify it like that, but that was very long-winded. Bring me to my point. I know what you mean. How have you got on with the globe heads? I mean, it's not obvious or observable to them. So how are you dealing with them?
Well, one of the things that, and I did a series like debate tactics, for the flat earther, and that actually constitutes the first 10 chapters in the Flat Earth Activist. And one of the things I said is, we need to take away their intellectual high ground, because they don't know we're on a ball. They think they do. We know we're not on a ball. We don't know much beyond that. I mean, we know it doesn't curve. We can't say anything definitively, but so what I'm saying is this: Globers are claiming to believe something that they can't possibly know. And so we can actually take the intellectual high ground. And so that's been my approach is, hey, we're all, like, none of us are on a ball. And I think that it's time that those of us who are looking into this can be more assertive to say, this is all deception. We're constantly lied to by the media. They've lied about the history books. They've lied about pretty much every aspect of our lives. We've been lied to. So why wouldn't they lie about the maps? Why wouldn't they have lied about this? And I think it's interesting that even people who are very critical, they recognize the media lies. They recognize that history has been rewritten. The Mandela effect is the standard operating procedure for the globalist media. They will selectively lie and edit and fabricate stories to push certain narratives. And so I think that those of us who are questioning things, we're the ones who are being intellectually honest. And so my point to like being more aggressive about saying, hey, we're all flat earthers, you can't opt out of it, sorry. It's like this, as Matt Boylan called it, a punk rock FU type attitude, very anti-authoritarian. And I think that's the attitude that we need to have to move this thing forward. We can't treat deceived people who have Stockholm syndrome with kid gloves, because they're defending a system that will enslave their children and their grandchildren. And if there is reincarnation, hey, we're going to be screwed in our next incarnations.
I was going to round it out shortly, but you've touched on something that I do want to get in here, which is about Stockholm syndrome and Uncle Tom's. So
Yes.
Can you tell us what you mean by those two terms, please?
Yes. Okay. So Stockholm syndrome is what happens when your needs have become synonymous with the needs of your captor. And therefore, if your captor dies, you die. So you have this symbiotic relationship. It's unbalanced. It is inherently an abusive relationship because of the power disparity. But that Stockholm syndrome is a survival mechanism that's ingrained into us, and we need it to be able to survive even if we don't like the current situations. Falling in love with your captor, that's normal. That's just basic human psychology. And so we all have Stockholm syndrome to the extent that we're not allowing ourselves to question the authorities. And so that's normal and that's acceptable, and you can overcome it. But Uncle Tom syndrome is from Uncle Tom's Cabin, who was the one who said, hey, what's so bad about the plantation? Let's just continue to serve master. You don't want to go out there and fend for yourself. So what's worse, Uncle Tom syndrome is saying, no, keep your Stockholm syndrome, stay a victim, maintain the status quo, don't leave the plantation. And if there was this disease back when, if a slave didn't want to stay on the plantation, they said, oh, he's got drapetomania. You just got to whip it out of him. And so every flat earther is a drapetomaniac, essentially, because we're trying to get out of this.
Meaning a slave that wants to leave the plantation, heaven forbid.
Exactly. You want to change the power disparity. And this is the thing about, you see this in myths. Anytime that the people, the masses, are able to elevate themselves through technology or otherwise to the level of the elite, that's when the elite flood them. That's the story of Prometheus. He goes to Mount Olympus, he steals the fire of the gods, starts civilization. And the gods are like, hey, that's not cool. So they flood everybody, and they chain Prometheus to a rock, and then a vulture eats his liver every day for eternity. That's how they see it. So the elite are not gods, but they're only gods to the extent that we accept the power disparity. It's a codependent relationship, and it does require some degree of complicity. You know, the person with Stockholm syndrome, if you're not rebelling, if you're not fighting against it, they're putting you into a lower position. And so I look at the globe itself is an instrument of psychological warfare. It is institutional oppression.
Before I've even asked you again, thank you so much for being on. I will thank you again, but yeah, you've been a really good guest. But you've just summarised it. But the why, so why they lie about the globe? Why do we have this globe deception? If you could give us that in a summary form, and then I'll round out. Thank the audience, and we'll round up there.
Okay, yeah. The globe is nothing more than it is a mechanism of psychological warfare to convince us that we're slaves. So that's what it is. It's an instrument to convince us that there's nowhere else to go and that the authorities have our best interests. Because if you're born into slavery, if you have ancestral slavery, meaning, you know, you weren't captured where you're still resisting against the chains, but when you're actually comfortable in it, you're born in it, and you've accepted the status quo, that's what they want. They want you to be a compliant, happy slave. Aldous Huxley talked about this. He said, the brave new world will be a world full of happy slaves who don't know they're enslaved. They're easier to control. And I think that's what this new world order thing wants to be. They want to drug everyone with SSRIs. They want to make everything so comfortable that we don't recognize how bad it is. And then when you're born into something, you don't even have anything to compare it to. And so generation by generation, they could bring us deeper and deeper into serfdom, to where, read Romans 13. If you're born a slave, God made you a slave, so be the best slave you can and serve your Lord. And that's what they want us. They want us to be happy slaves, and that's what the globe is for, and that's why we need to break it. So.
Very, very well put. Is there anything you wanted to plug before we round out?
No, I mean, I've already plugged my book enough. And other than that, though, yeah, Infinite Plane Society is my YouTube channel. If you want, I do sell maps to infiniteplanesociety.com. And just so you know, full disclosure, I make about $2 profit each map. But so it's not like I'm making a ton of money off it. To me, every map sold is a victory. And I've been selling like 4 or 5 a week, 18 by 24 Gleason projections. And I know they're not accurate representations of what we're in. We don't know there's an ice wall 360 around us. But if you're surrounded by the globe, every day you see it, you're being gaslit. They're messing with your mind. So if you go home and you see the flat Earth map, it validates your reality, the reality that we're actually in. And so we have to consistently validate our own experiences against their constant attempts to psychologically invalidate us, because that's what they're doing. They're trying to invalidate our own perceptions. So we have to rely on them. So I do sell maps for that reason. It's all to move forward this mindset of, you know, you're an activist for the truth. That's what you're doing. You're trying to shift a paradigm, and it's not going to happen as long as you're constantly kneeling before their icons. So that's so
Does
anyway,
that have a website address you can send people to?
InfinitePlaneSociety.com.
Perfect.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for having me on. It was nice to talk to you. It took us a little while to get in touch, but you have a great show.
No, well, you've been, as I say, I've said several times, you've been a really wonderful guest. It's pretty late here, so you can probably hear me stumbling over my words. But yeah, you've been a really, really good guest. So
you're way over there across the plane. You're not on the other side of the planet. You're just way out there across the plane, and so it's later for you. Cool.
Yeah, in that direction. But yeah. So yes, with that, thank you very much to Tim Osman for being on Flat Earth United Kingdom. It's been a real pleasure having him here, and to all of you who have joined us in the live audience and in the chat. Also, thank you very much for being here. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. I've been Nathan Oakley. I'll see you all in the next video.